Heavenly Father, we thank you that you love us, that you have created a place for us.
Yes.
Lord, that you see us no matter who we are, what we're about, and you love us. Lord, we ask that you open our hearts and our minds to you, open to what you have to say. Heavenly Father, let the words that come out of my mouth not be mine, but be yours. In your name we pray. Amen. If you are a child and a youth or special needs, you are dismissed to go to your class. I hope I dismissed all the right people. Did it wrong one time, but I yelled at afterwards. It was terrible. I'm very excited to be with you all. It's been a wild week for me. My son got promoted to a bear officially for Cub Scouts on Friday night. It was exciting times. And today after church, we have to run out of here to get to another Cub Scout thing called bridging, where it becomes a Weeblo, and he's all excited. And I'm exhausted. But then yesterday, I graduated from seminary. Yeah, it's exciting times. I want to thank the few of you that showed up and came. And then we decided to go see a concert all last night. So I stayed out way too late partying, I guess, watching jazz music. But we're in this series called Infinite. And it's an exciting series because we're really looking at God and who God is and his characteristics of God. And we've touched on a bunch of different ones. But I think as Christians, and maybe Bible-believing Christians, a lot of times people go to church and they're told to be a Christian, there's just kind of this list of things that you can do and things that you can't do, right? Do's and don'ts. And it frustrated me, I think, growing up, because I grew up a lot of times when people told me, like, John, these are the things that you can do. And these are the things that if you do, God will be happy with you, right? And then really what we're saying through this process is that we're gaining God's acceptance by what you do and what you don't do. And that's what makes a Christian a lot of times. That's the message that we portray. But what I really think it is, I started really looking at this thing called Christianity, is it's about having a personal relationship with God. Would you agree? I think so. It's how we communicate with God. It's how God communicates with us. And that when we hear from God and we actually have an active relationship with God, and through that experience, our lives start to change. It's allowing God in the middle of things. It's knowing who he is. Because a lot of times we see God as just this kind of big idea. Or maybe we take our understanding of God from what we've learned on the street, right? Or what we've learned from other people. But it's not really how we interpret what this says right here as to who God is and what he says he is. And I love being a pastor. It's been a blast being your pastor because I've got to have great conversations with people. I love it. All day long, I just sit and I talk to people. We have people here every day of the week. And no matter what time I show up, there's somebody here at this church all the time. Right? It's wonderful. So I sit in the parking lot. The other day I sat with this couple. They go to one of our NA groups at noon. And I was just talking to them, getting to know them. And it was funny because as they were communicating, they've been married for 30 years. And the wife kept making a joke that kind of my wife makes a lot. And she's like, yeah, this is not the man that I married. Right? And the husband got kind of offended a little bit. He's like, well, you're not the woman I married either. You know, like his guard got up. And I laughed because my wife, we've been married 14 years. And there's so many times she's like, John, I didn't know you were such a nerd. When I married you, you have this weird obsession with Star Wars and everything Marvel. I'm like, well, when I married you, that wasn't the movies that were mainstream everywhere. And then they came out, and now I can geek out because it's okay for me to geek out, right? I'm like, it's not like you're the same woman. When I married you, you wore corduroy pants and you carried a knife. Now all you do is eat vegan and you play with essential oils all the time. So, hey, I'm nerded up. But if it's true in relationships, right? And that's how we see things. Things evolve, things change. I know it's often true in our relationship with God. The way you see God is always going to change. The way you interact with God is always going to change. And let's be real here. If you want to experience this life change that the Bible talks about, this personal relationship with God, you need to know him for who he truly is. So that's the essence of this series. That's really what we're looking at, is to understand and grow deeper in our relationship with God and understand who he is. Because our lives, no matter who you are, no matter what you're good at, no matter what titles that you have, we are really defined by our limits. Right? But God has no limits. He is limitless. He is eternal, we have talked about. He is self-sufficient, we have talked about. And today, we're going to look at a God's characteristic of self-existence. I just got a Master's of Divinity. We're going to go deep a little bit today, right? Because we have a God who was not created, and he needs nothing. Now, all of a sudden, some of you are like checking out on me. Oh gosh, we're going down this. Yes, we're going down this rabbit trail today a little bit. Because he needs no one. And that's the truth. God's self-existence, or I'm going to put it another way, as the God of infinite and limitless creativity. Okay? He needs no one. If you'll turn with me to John chapter 1, I think, a lot of people, when you open the Bible, you start in the very beginning. A lot of times when people ask me where they should read, I say start in the New Testament. But I love what John does. And to be honest, I wish that the New Testament started with John 1:1. Because I think it's just so phenomenal. Let's read it. John 1 through 4. In the beginning was the Word. And the Word was with God. And the Word was God. He was with God in the beginning. Through him, all things were made. Through him, nothing was made that has been made. In him was life. And that life was the light of all mankind. I love that. John opens with this clear message. And I think anybody who's ever read a Bible, whether it's just somebody that picked a Gideon's Bible up in a hotel room and decided to read from the beginning, you always start at the beginning of a book, usually. So a lot of people, they can relate to this. Anybody that was around would have known Old Testament times. And there's a verse that starts the Bible that is very familiar here. Right? Genesis 1:1 is what? Can anybody quote it for me? The beginning was the Word. In the beginning, God created the world, the heavens and the earth. That's how it starts. And John uses very similar wording here to make a point. And the point is this pretty big point. He talks about how God created the world. And he's making a point that God was doing, that Moses was doing when he wrote Genesis, is that God has no beginning. And here's the thing, though. There is no real explanation given for God. Right? We have no explanation for it. It doesn't say, here's the backstory on God. Here's the history of God. Which, we can be honest, I think in our lives it frustrates us sometimes. Right? I have a son who's 8. He's trying to figure out this faith thing. And he's like, Dad, how was God created? Right? It's a hang-up for some people. I have 2 kids, right? They tell me stories all the time, and they'll start into the story of like, Dad, here's my day. And I was in this thing, and I'm like, stop, son. I need backstory a little bit. Give me some context here. Who are the characters in this story? And sometimes in the Bible, we get that. We get the backstory. We get the context for things. In some stories, we don't. In this story, I hate to say it, we don't get much backstory and context on God. Just we know from John 1:1, it says, in the beginning, God created the heavens and the earth, and that's it. Right? We don't get the backstory on God. We don't get the history on God. And there's a couple of things that we can emphasize from this passage that I think are really worth mentioning here today. Number one, it says that God created the world, right? That's what John wants us to know. That's what Moses wanted us to know in Genesis 1. In the sense, if God created all things, that means, though, that God is not a part of this world. And if we get a little bit deeper here, that world is not part of God. He created the world, yes. And we see that through the whole book of the Bible. And in Romans, it even goes on to look at the nature, right? And it says, man, somebody must have created these things. Who created these beautiful environments? Who created the oceans? Who created these mountains, right? I've been amazed on Yahoo. I looked on the internet today, and it seemed like every day of the week there was a story about Mount Everest, right? And how insanely overcrowded Mount Everest is. And there's like 800 people queued up to get to the top of the line, and they're up 25,000 feet, and they can barely breathe, and people are dying daily. People are walking over dead bodies just to get to the top of the world to see the most beautiful sight in the world. Somebody had to have created that. Right? People risk their lives to see this massive thing. Or, people sit there and they think, man, who created humanity? I mean, the mind, the heart, people. We get in these things and we ask these questions, and it's a natural thing, and it's a natural part of life, I think, to get to this moment. You're like, who created all this? What is this all about? And I think these questions help us, though. But God is not a part of the world. And the world is not a part of God. God is not the ocean. God is not the mountain. God is not the stars. Some think he is. But God is not the world. The second thing in this passage is that God created all things through Jesus Christ. That's what he's saying. In the beginning, here he's referencing Genesis 1, was the Word, right? Creation. And the Word was with God, and the Word was God. Later in verse 14, he's going to say that the Word became flesh and dwelt among us. And his name is Jesus, right? But through him, Jesus Christ, he was this agent that takes place. And what we're learning in this passage is all of creation, all things were made. And without him, nothing was made that has been made. So Jesus Christ is the agent for all creation. Jesus didn't create things long ago and then walk away, right? It's his nature to continue to create. So I think is the big idea. It's God's nature to create. He wants to create. And why is that important? It's not something that he just does. It's a part of who he is. He speaks things into life in our natural world, in the supernatural world, you name it. And why is this important? Because we are prone in our own creation, in the image of God, to worship created things. I think Christians and non-Christians alike, we're prone to worship things. Whether it's the stars, whether it's Mount Everest, whether it's other people, whether it's the work of our own hands instead of the God who created them. It's a natural tendency for us to go down those roads. And when we do that, I think we do ourselves harm. Let me just read a passage from Jen Wilkins. I've told you another time that None Like Him is this book that we're kind of using as an example for this series. And she states it like this. Worshiping the creation rather than the Creator does not cause us to protect life or steward creation. It causes us to devalue life and consume creation. This is because all worship of the creation is actually a veiled form of self-worship. Consider abortion, human trafficking, domestic violence, child abuse as daily evidence of the disordered worship of people. Rather than treating people as image bearers, we treat them as consumables, as expendable, only holding value insofar as they feed our desires. Dig through our landfills and gaze at the shattered landscapes to discern our disordered worship of things. Rather than stewarding resources, we treat them as consumable, as expendable, only holding value insofar as they situate our own cravings. When we attach our worship to something less than God, we end up consuming and casting off the person or thing we worship in his place. And in the consuming and casting off, we reveal the true object of our worship, which is ourselves. We make a shameless declaration that I am, instead of God is I am. And here's the point. If you believe that God is self-existent, that God didn't have a beginning, that he doesn't have a creator, but it's his nature to create, and you look at other people, I think we ought to be moved to worship the one who created them. I think that as we see other people, we should be inspired to want to help those who are hurting that God created. To take care of this earth, to take care of animals, to take care of other people, to give a deeper respect to other people as we worship God, the one who created it. Secondly, in this passage, we'll see that the world that God created, it only makes sense through Jesus. The world that God created, it really only makes sense through Jesus. Colossians 1:15-20 is another verse we're going to look at. It says this. The Son is the image of the invisible God, the firstborn over all creation. For in him all things were created, things in heaven and on earth, visible and invisible, whether thrones or powers or rulers or authorities, all things have been created through him and for him. He is before all things, and in him all things are held together. And he is the head of the body, the church. He is the beginning and the firstborn from among the dead, so that in everything he might have the supremacy. For God was pleased to have all his fullness dwell in him, and through him to reconcile to himself all things, whether things on earth or things in heaven, by making peace through his blood that was shed on the cross. Amen is right. I think this passage is really only affirming what John was saying. And Jesus Christ, the Son of God, created all things. But it says so much more, right? Jesus didn't just create all things in this passage. It says in verse 16, for in him all things were created. Right? He didn't just create all things. He's at the center of all things. Some people say to me, hey, John, I believe in God. I do believe that there's a creator. But, I mean, look at this world. This world's broken. I mean, you just have to wake up in the morning and turn on the news and somebody else killed somebody. There's murder, there's rape, there's horrific things. There's human trafficking like crazy. I mean, we have it here in Chula Vista. It's happening everywhere. How can you tell me that this world, when there's so many problems and there's so much suffering, the murder, the rape, everything, the genocide, the war, the hatred, and you're telling me that God created the world, and then what? Did he just step back? That's it? He just walked away and he said, hey, we're going to see how things work out. Good. Go for it. I'll see you in heaven. I'm sorry, but that's not what this book says. That's not what this passage says, right? God didn't just create the world. He didn't just create everything. It says that he is at the center of all things. Verse 15. Can we put it back up there, guys? It says he is the firstborn over all creation. He's not the firstborn of creation. Because what the Bible affirms that Jesus, God's Son, he isn't just this superhuman, right? He's not like you and me, just a little bit better or a step above all other men and women. No, he says he's not the firstborn of creation. And this concept here in Hebrew is the word bara, right? And he's using this primogeniture, which it means that the firstborn the family back then had the full inheritance. Right? They were considered number one. They had top priority. They're the most important in the world. It's a way of talking about a level of importance. He is the firstborn over creation. Verse 17, he is before all things. He's talking about everything. Not only things on earth, but in heaven, he says, in thrones, and power, and glory, and spiritual realities. All things have been created through him and for him. He's before all things. Not only that, in him, all things hold together. What does that mean? It's only in knowing God, really knowing him, that the world and all your life and my own reality in life can make sense, right? It's only through the lens of Jesus. That's why if you have friends or people in your life, family members in your life, and I've had people say, listen, John, man, I wish I could believe like you believe. Right? Has anybody ever said that to you? I wish I could have the faith that you have. Not anti, not against, but just what you believe. And they say, I can't believe what you believe because when I look at these realities and all the things that are going on in this world, I can't add it up. It doesn't make sense to me. I can't recognize a loving God in a world that's such a mess. And people say this all the time, and I have great sympathy for that. And what Paul the Apostle is saying, what John is saying, is that Jesus Christ isn't the creator of the world. He's really at the center of all things. And it's only truly knowing him that our world that we live in starts to make sense, that my life actually starts to make sense. When God is not the center and we are instead making our own choices and doing our own thing, that's when everything goes downhill. But when we look at God through the lens and say, God, I want you at the center of my life. I need you in control of these things, that he's going to do his job and that life's going to start to make sense. Look at verse 19. For God was pleased, God the Father, to have all his fullness dwell in him. What he's trying to do is say, listen, guys, there's like three pieces to the pie, right? You got God the Father, Jesus, you got the Holy Spirit. He's saying in everything, all the fullness of God, all dwelling is in the person of Jesus, and it's amazing. It's this difficult truth. And what he's really trying to say is there's a lot of life that's going to frustrate you. There's always going to be injustice and painful things that you're going to see and hear about. There's a lot that probably we can never get an explanation to. I wish I could help everybody. I wish I could give everybody all the answers that they want in life. But what's happening with you, with your health, and in your family things. And what Paul's saying here is Jesus Christ is not only the creator of everything, he's at the center of everything. And what this broken world is, what my broken and perfect life is about, is God sent his son on a mission. That mission was achieved largely when Jesus shed his blood on the cross. But it's in knowing Jesus and seeing him at the center of your reality that you can truly understand your life. That you can understand what's going on in this world. And he's this interpretive key, right? He's the creator. It's like we've been given this puzzle. When I was growing up, my mom loved to do puzzles. Any of you puzzlers in here? Who likes a puzzle? I get over them pretty fast, right? But have you ever had a puzzle and you get to the end and like you're missing a piece, right? It's like world ending, right? Like I'm done. I'm not touching one again. Or I once was given a puzzle and the picture on the front cover didn't match the puzzle. It was made that way. I was like, oh, that's messed up. Right? I'm like, dude, not cool. Because you're sitting there and I'm putting all the pieces and you do the rim, like the outer first. That's how I do it at least. And then I try to fill it in. And I'm doing this outer going, I know I'm colorblind, but I'm pretty sure there's no yellow on this page. And this whole thing is yellow. Oh no. Right? And in life, I think we get this sometimes. And we look and we've got all these thousands of puzzle pieces sitting on a table. And we're like, I don't know the end picture. Like, I'm just trying to figure this out a lot of times, right? And we look at this and we're like, man, I wish I had the interpretive key. And Jesus is like, man, I want to be that interpretive key for you. I want to be that picture. I want to be that end solution. So you're not just going, what is the meaning of all this? Why are we here? What is the point? It's me. Let me come in and be the center of these things and let me help you. Right? It's almost like, we get so frustrated on these things. And when I talk to people, I don't know what it's like, but I talk to a lot of students for a long time. I talk to a lot of adults now. And they look at the world, in a world that's increasingly seeming to have lost its mind, right? And this world that's falling apart, where families are pulled apart, and this world culture seems to be falling apart. And we've got people stuck camping out at the border because they don't know what everything, and I'm not political, but I just see a world that's hurting. And I see all of these needs and these pain, and people look everywhere and they don't see a reason for living anymore. What the Bible tells us is Jesus Christ is this reason. The world that God created only makes sense and will only make sense through Jesus. And the application and sobering truth here is, if Jesus Christ created everything, he's the creator, he's my creator. He owns everything, including you. This application, unless Jesus is truly the center of your life, unless he's number one, right? Luke 9 teaching, unless you lose your life, you're not going to find him, right? Unless he's at the center of your life, you will not know who you are. Your life is not going to make sense. Jesus Christ didn't just come to be first in your life, right? He wants to be first, but he wants to be first in everything in your life. That's where we mess up sometimes. Say, God, I want you to be in this area, but maybe you're not going to be first in my marriage. Maybe you're not going to be first in my parenting today. Maybe, God, you're not going to be first in my personal life today. I need a day off. Right? It's me time, not you time. She's like, no, you don't get it. You have to make Jesus first in every aspect of your life. You give him that spot. Is he first in your thought life, in your relationships, in your action process? And unless Jesus Christ is not only first in all things because he created you, and if he's not first in everything in your life is not going to make sense because he's the interpretive key. He's at the heart. He's not just the creator of all things. He's at the center of all things. That's why this is such an important truth. You were made for him. And it's only when you know this that he becomes the center and your life really starts to make sense. That my life can start to make sense. I was at a conference one time, and there was this woman from InterVarsity Christian Fellowship, and she said this, and I wrote it down. It says, the distance between the earth and the sun, which is 92 million miles, was the thickness of a piece of paper. The diameter of our galaxy would be a stack of papers 310 miles high. Like, geez. And our galaxy is less than a speck of dust in that part of the universe that we can see. And that part of the universe might just be a speck of dust compared to all the universe. Now here's my point. If Jesus is the Son of God who holds all things together with his power, Is that the kind of person that you ask into your life and then you make him your personal assistant? And I love that. Guys, you think about that. This is the problem. I think we live in this very individualized culture, right? We're hyper-individualized. It's all about me. And I think many of us, we come to church and we listen and we're like, yeah, church, God, I want you in my life. And church is all about God. And God is just here to meet my needs, though. We say that to him, right? And the second that God doesn't meet our needs, whether it's in our marriage, in our health, our family, and everything, we push God to the door. Say, God, you didn't meet my needs. I don't need you right now. I'm going to figure this out. I'm going to do it on my own. Then we wonder why life gets crazy and life gets hard and life goes down rabbit trails, right? Just like, man, I want to be the center of your life. I want to be at the center of everything. I want to be first priority. But Jesus is not only the center of your life, he needs to be that. The meaning of life is that you were created for him. And it's not about God just constantly serving your needs. The people who are truly serving God, Jesus is not only the first in the priority of his life, but he's first in everything in your life. And that's the meaning of life. You were created for him. Last point, I think God specializes in bringing something out of nothing. Right? Infinite creativity. This is the point. This is what creation is. Creation isn't just something he does. It is his nature to create. And he is still creating here today. 2 Corinthians 5:17 says, basically, we're a new creation in Christ. Right? Things are going to pass away. But all things become new. And this is what the gospel is about. And this is this amazing thing about Christianity that I would say. And if we truly understand the gospel, it's about God using his unique nature. He's creating something from nothing. God specializes in bringing something from nothing. Your sins, your failures, your regret, your blown opportunities. Where we see them as the end of the story, God sees them as the work for new creation. David in the Bible. I mean, there's two main characters that get a lot of reference. You got Jesus, who gets 4 books, right? And then some. And you got David. He's got 66 chapters written about him. It's just a little bit of info. David made some poor choices in his life. 2 pretty big sins and 1 good story. Right? Anybody know what 2 major sins were? He committed adultery and then he murdered right after, right? That's kind of some damage and weight on your shoulders, I think. Would you agree? I want that in my story. I don't want to sit there and dwell on that. I have a bad guilt conscience when I screw up, right? My whole everything gets more, I get stressed out. I can't handle life. I have to own it instantly and it just overwhelms me, right? I can't imagine having those 2 weights on my shoulders. And here's David, and he's sitting there, and we see all these prayers and laments, right? And you can tell at some point he couldn't take it anymore. He's like, I can't do this. I need your forgiveness, God. In Psalm 51, we had that verse up, if you saw it in the middle of worship. We put it up, and he's like, oh man, I can't do this, God. I'm overwhelmed. I'm done. He says, God, I need you to do what only you can do. You got to do something here because my life is overwhelming. I'm at a point where I don't know anymore. God, do what you do. And he said, God, forgive me, but not only that, create me a clean heart. God, I need you, the God of creation, to renew a right spirit within me. Cast me not away from your presence. Oh man, we have a God who's not like us. We have a God that looks at us and says, I'm not done working in your life. I want to create in you something new today. But the only way I can do that is if you let me be at the center. If you put me first, here, now, today. You know what? Those puzzle pieces that don't make sense. And yeah, you might not have all the backstory of why all this is happening. And you might need more context in your life. But you know what? Put me at the center. And let me do what I do. My nature is to create. So let me create in you a clean heart today. Let me renew your spirit today. Because that's what I want to do for you. But it's your choice. It's your call. Heavenly Father, I ask, Lord, that you work through us, that you guide us, that you help us. Because I don't know about you, but man, there's a lot of times that I have put you second. And I am ashamed. That, Lord, you are not number one in my life all the time. And I know that there's people in here that are going through that same thing because we're human. Right? It's our nature to instantly want to worship something else. To fill that void. To walk away when we don't think you're meeting our needs all that we should. Lord, but we ask that you help us. If we do have a heart nature that we need to turn over to you, that we stop for a moment and own it today. We're about to take communion. This time where you can become the center, where you can enter into our lives, where you can become a changing force and create a new. Lord, if you could take David, who had these major sins, and you could work through him and use him for your glory, I don't know how amazing you could work through our own lives and use us for that same thing. Lord, I pray that you come to the center of my life in all areas. That I will be first. Or you will be first in my life. Take a moment to talk to God.